winter of 1891, 16-year-old William Carter proposed a curious plan to build a small shed entirely within the old barn at the edge of the settlement. Neighbors gathered to watch, shaking their heads at what they called pointless work. The authority of Mr. Thompson, the local blacksmith, cast further doubt, insisting that William's labor would be wasted. Yet, beneath the gray skies and biting wind, the boy worked methodically, measuring, sawing, and fitting beams with quiet determination, aware that the first snow would soon arrive. The settlement, mostly farmers and loggers, murmured with skepticism. If you were in William's shoes, would you have risked building the shed inside the barn despite everyone mocking you? Comment below with your choice. And don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to see more real survival stories from the frontier. His younger sister Mary carried boards and hammered nails under his careful guidance, moving with cautious efficiency. The occasional grunt or scrape of wood sounded louder in the empty space of the barn, and the small group of observers shifted uneasily. "You'll freeze yourself before the snow even falls," Mr. Thompson muttered. William did not reply, focusing on his alignment of the rafters and the placement of each plank. By late afternoon, the interior of the barn had taken the faint shape of the proposed shed, a small, square enclosure, reinforced with extra beams and insulated crudely with straw. Villagers whispered among themselves, noting the oddity of constructing a building inside another structure. "What use will it be?" Samuel, a neighboring farmer, asked quietly. William paused only to measure the space once more before resuming his work, hammering with precise, deliberate strokes. Outside, the wind began to carry the first flurries of snow, dusting the roof of the barn and the surrounding frozen ground. The boy's concentration never wavered. Each beam fitted tightly, each joint checked twice. Elder Jacob, who had remained mostly silent, watched from a distance, nodding slightly but saying nothing. The scene was quiet, save for the wind and the occasional echo of timber striking timber. As the sun set behind the distant ridges, the shed's framework was largely complete, its presence modest, yet unmistakably functional. The villagers departed gradually, still muttering, still unconvinced, leaving William and Mary in the fading light to make the final adjustments before nightfall. Until that first storm hinted at the power of foresight, William's idea seemed laughable, a small act of careful labor dismissed by most but quietly resolute in purpose. The small settlement rested at the foot of the northern ridge, where winters were known to be merciless. Temperatures could fall below zero by night, and blizzards would arrive without warning. The land was dotted with timber cabins, open fields, and a scattering of livestock pens. William's family cabin stood isolated, its roof worn and chimney cracked. He gathered scrap wood, old nails, and remnants from the barn, working in silence while snow began to whisper against the roof. The isolation of the place meant that every decision mattered. Mistakes could cost warmth, provisions, or worse. The wind pressed against the cabin walls, rattling shutters and lifting loose straw from the loft. William measured each board before cutting, ensuring minimal waste, aware that any error might leave him exposed to the growing cold. Outside, the few other settlers tended to chores with urgency, checking fences and feeding animals quickly before the storm fully arrived. The ridge above cast long shadows, and the snow-dusted trees groaned under the weight of ice. Each movement in this small frontier settlement required focus and care. Missteps could bring discomfort or danger that lingered long into the night. Evening settled quietly, the air sharp with frost. William paused to inspect the alignment of his timber, his breath forming a thin mist in the dim light of the cabin. Mary handed him a bundle of nails, and he inserted them with practiced precision, each strike of the hammer echoing softly in the still room. Beyond the cabin walls, the land stretched cold and silent, broken only by the distant bleat of a goat or the creak of a fence swaying in the wind. In such isolation, every small action carried weight, and the coming winter would soon reveal which preparations endured. This is where preparation begins to show its power. Hit like if you admire William's foresight, share with friends who love survival strategies, and subscribe for more tales of endurance in harsh winters. Neighbors continued to mock, observing William hammering beams into the barn's interior. "A shed inside a barn," Mr. Thompson scoffed. "Better spend your strength on proper insulation, boy." A handful of villagers, including Elder Jacob and Farmer Samuel, voiced concern for the boy's safety, fearing he might injure himself during construction. William, however, kept a steady rhythm, mindful of the long winter nights and the chill settling into the valley. Even his younger sister, 12-year-old Mary, whispered her worry but followed him when he asked for help moving planks. The barn itself creaked under the weight of the snow beginning to settle on its roof, and William worked carefully to avoid slipping or bending nails incorrectly. Mary handed him boards in precise order, and he adjusted each one with measured attention, pausing occasionally to ensure alignment. Samuel leaned on the fence post, watching silently, noting the boy's focus yet unable to offer advice without seeming intrusive. Elder Jacob shook his head softly, murmuring about the recklessness of youth, yet remained nearby in case assistance was needed. The villagers debated quietly among themselves. "He'll tire before the storm fully sets in," one remarked. "Or worse," another added, "he may waste hours on a shed that serves no purpose." William heard none of it, concentrating on his plan and the faint drafts that slipped through the barn walls. His motions were deliberate, cutting each board with care, hammering nails with consistent rhythm, and fitting beams so that the frame would hold under snow and wind. The chill pressed against his fingers, the day shortened rapidly, and the cold seeped through gaps in the barn planks. By late afternoon, the shed began to take a more defined shape. The villagers' conversations waned as the work progressed. The noise of the hammer and saw dominated the barn. Mary stacked scraps of wood and swept sawdust into neat piles, moving quietly to avoid obstructing her brother. Even Mr. Thompson lingered a moment, examining the growing structure, though his tone remained skeptical. The winter's early frost glazed the ground outside, reflecting a muted light through the barn's cracks. Until the snow deepened, the value of William's labor remained uncertain, leaving only the sound of steady work and the occasional exhale of effort in the cold air. By early December, the temperature had dropped sharply, and the wind brought snow in relentless sheets. The settlers hurried to fortify their homes, stacking firewood and sealing cracks. William continued to build the shed, now fully enclosed within the barn walls. The first real storm struck mid-December, a low-pressure system sweeping from the north, carrying ice and deep snow. Neighbors' cabins shivered under the strain of the wind, and the river ice thickened quickly. The boys' small shed, inconspicuous to all, seemed unremarkable amid the chaos, but it held a quiet promise. William adjusted a beam, ensuring the joints held tightly as the barn groaned with each gust. Mary worked beside him, arranging insulation between the boards while the wind rattled loose planks above. Samuel secured his cabin roof nearby, glancing toward the barn and shaking his head, uncertain how the structure would withstand the storm. Elder Jacob moved carefully across the frozen field, observing the sky's gray swirl and the snow thickening on fences and rooftops. The day deepened into a gray afternoon, with visibility reduced by the wind-driven snow. William checked each seam, inserted spare nails, and pressed straw into gaps that might admit drafts. The frost-coated air stung fingers and ears alike, but the boy worked steadily, pausing only to measure and align. Outside, snow piled against doors and windows, forming drifts that obscured paths and bent fence posts. The settlement endured the storm in varying states of readiness. Some cabins shook, others strained at old beams, Yet William's shed remained quietly forming, prepared to resist the full force of the winter that was settling over the ridge. By evening, the storm's intensity increased. The barn shivered under wind and ice, and the other settlers relied on thick fires to stave off the cold. William and Mary continued methodically, aware that the strength of their work might soon be tested. The shed, simple and unassuming, offered a measure of calm amid the relentless white and wind, a small structure, yet increasingly significant as the storm pressed across the valley. The coming night would reveal the value of foresight and careful labor. Would you have endured the blizzard as calmly as William did? Leave your answer in the comments. Like this video if you value patience over haste, share it with others, and subscribe to follow the story to its conclusion. On the night of December 14th, the blizzard arrived with full force. Snow piled against doors and windows, drifts covering fences and paths. Families huddled near hearths, blankets pulled tight. Inside the barn, William's shed offered an enclosed layer of protection. The additional walls and roof within the barn slowed heat loss significantly. Mary and their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Harris, joined him inside, finding the air considerably warmer than outside. Neighbors peered from their windows, astonished that the shed remained intact while roofs strained and logs shifted. The cold tested every structure, but William's foresight became evident with each hour. The wind rattled the barn's outer timbers, shaking loose snow that slid silently from the roof. William checked the integrity of each joint, pressing straw into small gaps and ensuring that no draft penetrated the enclosed space. Mary moved quietly, stacking firewood in the corner to maintain the small, consistent warmth from the lanterns. Mrs. Harris, seated on a low bench, observed the boy's careful movements, remarking occasionally on his methodical work. "Steady hands, William. Steady hands." Outside, the storm intensified. Snow swirled in thick sheets, obscuring fences, paths, and livestock pens. Neighboring cabins groaned under the weight of ice and drifted snow, and the river froze further with each hour. Some settlers feared collapse, venturing out only to check on animals or reinforce doors before retreating to their fires. The shed, quiet and unassuming within the barn, maintained a stable temperature, holding its occupants safe from the full force of the winter gale. By the early hours of morning, the blizzard had reached its peak. William moved deliberately, ensuring no section of the shed weakened under the strain. Mary passed him additional straw, and the interior remained nearly 40 degrees warmer than the air beyond the barn. Neighbors, watching silently from their windows, began to comprehend the purpose of the unusual construction. William's labor, once questioned and ridiculed, had become the difference between enduring the storm and surrendering to its cold, and the significance of his foresight settled over the settlement like a quiet, enduring proof. By morning, the storm had passed. Snow lay in drifts 5 feet high in places, and many cabins bore damage, broken shingles, cracked walls, and frozen water barrels. William's shed, however, was untouched. Inside, temperatures measured 42 degrees warmer than the surrounding cabins. The authority figures, including Mr. Thompson, examined the shed quietly, noting its efficiency. The villagers observed, in a restrained way, that the boy's unusual approach had outlasted the elements. No cheering or celebration occurred. The acknowledgement was measured, practical, and silent. The barn's outer walls bore the marks of wind and ice, bending slightly under the storm's weight, yet the interior shed remained firm. William inspected each corner, pressing his hands against the timber to ensure stability, while Mary and Mrs. Harris arranged remaining firewood for continued warmth. Outside, neighbors cautiously emerged, assessing damage to roofs, fences, and outbuildings. Samuel approached the shed, running a hand along the walls, and simply nodded in quiet approval. Elder Jacob stood back, noting the orderly construction and the subtle difference that careful planning had made. Few words were exchanged. Mr. Thompson commented only to William, "Your structure held, boy. It holds well." The simplicity and practicality of the shed, reinforced within the barn, spoke louder than any declaration. The villagers continued with their recovery, patching roofs and clearing paths, while the shed remained a quiet testament to foresight. Its warmth, durability, and unassuming presence offered proof without ceremony, an example of careful labor prevailing where conventional methods had struggled. The settlement recognized the method, not in excitement, but in the steady, practical acknowledgement of success. By mid-morning, the snow reflected pale light across the valley. Footprints marked the paths of those checking cabins, yet the shed's interior retained calm, heat, and order. William continued minor adjustments, ensuring that gaps were closed and firewood stacked efficiently. Mary moved quietly, helping where needed, while Mrs. Harris rested briefly, the warmth from the shed mitigating the lingering chill of the long night. The proof was silent, tangible, and complete. The boy's labor had endured the storm in a way that words could scarcely capture. Notice how every small action made a huge difference. Like, share, and subscribe to learn how observation and careful work shaped survival in the frontier. What would your strategy have been? Over the following week, settlers adjusted their strategies. Some reinforced barns, others built interior partitions. Conversations shifted from mockery to respect, and William's method influenced practical decisions across the settlement. Elder Jacob remarked to neighbors, "The boy saw what we did not." Samuel and a few others began documenting techniques for next winter. Meanwhile, William continued to work quietly, gathering firewood and repairing minor damage, his presence calm amid the lingering cold. The settlement learned the value of observation, foresight, and measured effort. Neighbors inspected one another's cabins, noting which structures had suffered most and which had fared better. Adjustments were deliberate. Additional beams were braced, gaps stuffed with straw, and smaller rooms partitioned to retain heat. Conversations centered on efficiency and practicality, a departure from the skepticism and idle commentary that had dominated the earlier weeks. Even Mr. Thompson, once critical, lent advice on timber selection and bracing, acknowledging the effectiveness of William's approach. William moved methodically from task to task, collecting firewood from drifts, repairing minor roof damage, and checking on Mrs. Harris. Mary assisted where needed, stacking wood and clearing paths to maintain safe access. The cold persisted, yet the settlement's response became measured, informed by the quiet example the boy had set. Techniques were discussed in low tones, adjustments made without fanfare, and the community's focus shifted from immediate survival to preparation for the months ahead. By the week's end, the settlement had adapted. Structures were reinforced, habits adjusted, and a sense of quiet confidence took root. William's shed remained intact, a reference point for both efficiency and endurance. The acknowledgement was subtle, practical, and grounded in reality. Careful planning, observation, and deliberate effort could withstand the harshest of winters. Lessons had been learned, not through ceremony, but through the tangible outcomes of labor and foresight. Decades later, a man named Henry, once a boy during that winter, recalled William Carter's shed as the first truly resilient structure he had witnessed. The barn remained, though the settlement had expanded. The original shed within it still inspired practical construction. Henry described how William's approach planning, layering, and utilizing existing structures became standard practice. The memory of that winter carried with it lessons of patience and preparation, illustrating that even in the harshest conditions, foresight could preserve warmth, life, and community resilience. Henry walked through the older section of the settlement, noting timber cabins, reinforced barns, and layered sheds reminiscent of William's original design. He remembered how snow had piled against walls, how the wind had tested every roof, and how the boys' careful work had endured while others struggled. "We learned more than just construction," Henry said to a neighbor. "We learned to see ahead, to anticipate what winter demands." The settlers who had once laughed now taught these methods to their children, the lessons preserved in practice rather than ceremony. Inside the original barn, the shed's timber remained firm, the wood darkened with age yet still intact. Henry recalled Mary helping her brother, the meticulous care in stacking firewood, and the quiet diligence that had allowed warmth to endure. Other villagers had since adopted similar techniques, partitioned rooms, interior layering, and supplemental roofing, yet William's shed remained the first, a reference point for practical survival. Observing the structure, Henry felt the weight of history, labor measured, foresight rewarded, and a small boy's decision influencing decades of settlement practice. The winter of that year, once feared and endured, became a quiet lesson in patience and observation. Henry's memory emphasized that survival depended not on force or grandeur, but on careful planning, methodical labor, and the discipline to act before necessity demanded it. The legacy of William Carter's shed remained, unadorned yet influential, a reminder that resilience grows from the accumulation of small, deliberate choices. Even as the settlement modernized, the principles evident in that first winter endured, a silent testament to foresight, labor, and the enduring value of measured effort. What small choice could change your winter? Comment below, like, share, and subscribe for more frontier survival stories.